aside, good afternoon and welcome to the Alfred University Bergren Forum. My name is John D'Angelo and I am a professor of chemistry and the host for the fall 2024 season of the Bergren Forum. Today is Thursday, September 26th, 2024. This is episode 4. For those of you attending the forum online here in Western New York, it is a cloudy, damp, but otherwise warm day, and inside Nevins Theater of the Powell Campus Center, it is dry and cozy and the coffee and tea are hot and free. Before starting, we have a few announcements. First, next Thursday's forum will be given by Senior Network Administrator Adrian Morling. Adrian's talk will be about scuba diving. There are some events this week to announce. Namely, this weekend is Homecoming and Family Weekend. Also, the Queer Art Collective has put out an open call for queer artists. For more information, contact quac@alfred.edu. Students, faculty, Alfred community members, and alumni are all welcome. There is a free drawing for colorblind corrective glasses from Enchroma. 4 pairs of glasses will be given away, and you can enter the drawing in either of our on-campus libraries. The winners will be drawn at the homecoming football game during halftime. The glasses were donated by inventor of the glasses and AU alumnus, Don McPherson. Tomorrow is also Mentorship Day. There is still time to sign up if you have not already. To access the sign-up link, which is too long to say and expect anyone interested to remember, please go to my.alfred.edu and simply enter Mentorship Day into the search bar. Without further ado, today's forum will be given by Ayush Sengupta, who is an assistant professor of analytics at the College of Business here at Alfred University. The title of his talk is The Societal Impact of Ride-Sharing Through Gig Economy, Employment, Opportunities, and Equality. Take it away, Ayush.
First of all, thank you to the Bergren Forum for inviting me. It's truly an honor to be here. Thank you to everyone coming to my talk in this weather, and thank you to everyone joining online, and a special mention to my colleagues joining from the College of Business. So my name is Ayush Sengupta. I'm an assistant professor of analytics. So if I'm in analytics, it typically means that I'm spending a major share of my day crunching numbers, working with formulas and models. But I'll try my best to keep it not too nerdy in terms of numbers. And I'll try to tell a story because that's what we analysts do. We tell a story through numbers. And the topic is the societal impact of ride sharing. And there are many words after that. So I'll briefly talk about the different words. Ride sharing, in case you are not aware of, if you're hearing this word for the first time, like I did before I started my research on this topic, just think of Uber or Lyft. That is what we mean by ride sharing. And I will explain in a bit why it's different from a regular cab. I used to call them as app cabs, and there is no such thing. And then we have something called societal impact. So this talk is one of the 3 essays of my dissertation at my PhD. So when I was at my campus interview here at Alfred, the other paper that I was presenting as my job market paper was also related to the societal impact. And then I was told that Alfred University has a special emphasis on the societal impact when it comes to research. And that was like music to my ears. Wow, I'm in the right place. So I can count my odds now. The next word is gig economy. Now, what do we mean by the gig economy? So gigs are jobs that are usually temporary. So they are not employees, they're mostly contractors. So you think of any jobs that you do on a need-to basis, like there are many apps that allow you to ask people to do household chores for you. They are part of gig economy. And then there are these ride-sharing services like Uber or Lyft. And there could also be the food delivery services like Uber Eats and Grubhub. So wherever you have workers who are not actually employees, but contractors, we call that economy the gig economy. And lastly, I'll come to opportunities and equality. So now, whose opportunities or whose equality are we talking about? So when we get into an Uber ride, and this was particularly difficult for me to imagine in the context of this region, because I was in for a surprise when I found that we really didn't have much Ubers in Alfred or in Hornell, where I live. So that was quite a transition from the urban areas where I have lived earlier. But nonetheless, there is always an opportunity, no matter what the location is. So whenever we get into an Uber ride, so there are actually three players in the domain. We mostly think of ourselves as the rider. Most of the time, we are in the rear seat of the car. But this talk is about the person sitting behind the wheel. So they are the ones who are getting the gig employment through this platform. And then there is this platform, which is the invisible player. So Uber is an aggregator. It brings together the two different markets of riders who have the demand for a ride and the drivers who have the supply in terms of the car. And Uber is nothing but a matchmaker between the two. And that's where the power of technology comes into the picture. It is easier for riders to find rides through the technology, simply simply hailing a ride for a taxi. And it's also easier for drivers to find customers through this technology. So that's where the value of Uber comes in. And it might come as a surprise or a shock to a lot of people who know me. And it was definitely a shock to my parents that I did consider Uber as a career option at some point in my time. And my parents were like, what? You have all these fancy degrees. We spend so much on your education and you want to be an Uber driver? I said, why not? Like, it's like a dream job for me. Why? Because I love to drive. That's the first reason. I love driving. And one of the biggest benefits of driving for Uber is the flexibility. Like, I can drive whenever I want, and I can simply turn off my app if I'm just tired at the end of the day. I can work on the weekends. I can work in the evenings. And then the question was like, are you thinking of Uber as a full-time option or a part-time option? So that's the thing. So there are two types of drivers. So every time you come across any driver, they might belong to one of the two categories. The first category is the category of full-time drivers who depend on Uber for their livelihood. That's their daytime job. That's their primary job. And there are others like me who just want to spend their extra time and have a supplementary income. Like, it's like moonlighting. Yeah, so that's the term. So you moonlight while you're having a permanent daytime job. So there are quite a few benefits to actually being an Uber driver. And also, the cost of getting on board the Uber platform is really low. Like, you don't really need a lot of things. You just need a car. Sometimes you don't even need a car. So Uber often has the financing option for drivers to purchase a car and get on board their platform. You just need a minimum background check of yourself and your car, and that's it. You download the app and you are on the platform. So low barriers to entry. That is another feature of this platform. So which is why there are quite a few benefits that have been discussed in the academic literature and also in the media. So all the low barriers of entry, and it has proved to be useful during economically difficult periods. Like, if you don't have the regular options for your career, you can always look into the alternate option over here. And it also helps with long-term opportunities. Like, I have met Uber drivers who are students who are actually earning money and also preparing for their dream degrees or jobs at the same time. So you have flexibility. You can work whenever you want. And it also involves relatively less bias than the traditional industries, because like I said, there are low barriers to entry. You don't really have a lot of verification checks. They're minimal. So there are quite a few positives to this side. However, it's not always a rosy picture when it comes to the driver partners of Uber. Now, what actually is a boon to many drivers in terms of the low barriers of entry, in the long run, it becomes a curse. So if it is easy for you to get into the Uber platform as a driver, it is also easy for others. And the more people get on board the platform, the spoils are shared more. So you're left with very little. So the economic risks are actually transferred onto the drivers themselves. And Uber doesn't really take the responsibility of anything. They are not even the employer. And the biggest distinction between any ride-sharing or gig economy partner and the regular employee is that they are not employees in the first place. Uber drivers are not employees of the company. So what does that imply? It means that they do not have any of the benefits that we get in addition to our wages and salaries. They don't get the benefits of insurance or retirement benefits or anything. So they are contractors. So they don't really have much rights once they're on the platform. And this leads to a lot of dissent. And we have seen plenty of labor unrests in this domain. And there is no growth technically. Like in the university like ours, we move from an assistant professor to an associate to a full professor. But if you're an Uber driver, you're an Uber driver for life. There is no promotion, so there is no growth. And indirectly, there are also impacts on the other industries. So there are research papers that say that a rise in Uber's popularity has led to the decline of car sales, so which has negatively affected jobs in the automobile industry. So there are negatives to the platform, not only in terms of the direct employees, but even employees in the associated firms. So this presents us with an empirical tension. So we don't really know in which direction the effect goes when it comes to the impact of ride sharing to the society economically. Like, is it a good thing or is it a bad thing for the society? So here's where data comes into the picture. So we need numbers and we need to do some analysis to answer this question. That is why we have this need for the empirical analysis. Otherwise, it would have been a straightforward question to answer. But it's definitely an important question. And the next concept that I'd like to introduce is welfare. So I'm sure we are all aware of the concept of welfare, and it's important. So welfare is probably the most important thing in the society. And there are many ways in which we can measure welfare. And one of the traditional or like quantitative ways of measuring welfare is the equality of income in the society. So that's one of the earliest measures that have been used like for the last 100 years. And that is what we pick in this paper. So we try to define welfare in terms of the inequality. Now, research shows that social welfare is higher when income inequality is lower. And I think that is already intuitive. We don't really need research to say that we want to have an equitable society in terms of the income. So we first look at individual welfare, and then the social welfare is nothing but the sum of individual welfares. And in economics literature, we say that individual welfare increases with income at a diminishing rate. Now, what does this mean? It means that suppose I'm earning like $10,000 and someone hands me an additional $1,000. So I'll be very happy about it. But the person next to me earns $100,000. And you send the same money, like $1,000 to the other person. My happiness would be much more than the other person's. So the more I earn, the value of the additional amount of money that I get, it diminishes. So if we add all the members of the society together and their individual welfares, it has been found that in an idealistic scenario, the society would be the happiest when everyone earns the same amount of money. So if we pool all the incomes together of the university of the town or the town of Alfred, and we distribute it equally across every member, that's when the society of Alfred would be the happiest. And that's probably what socialism says, right? So whether it is feasible or not, that's a different question, but that's the ideal goal in terms of having perfect social welfare through economic equality. Okay, so, and now how does ride sharing come into the picture? Does ride sharing really have an impact on these aspects? So there have been quite some research in terms of the impacts, the societal impacts of ride sharing, like what's the impact on the usage of public transit, traffic congestion, housing prices, and so on in healthcare. But in most of these papers, we have actually focused on the impact on the riders, like from the consumers of the platform. What about the impact on the driver partners of the platform? So that's the research gap that we are trying to address in this paper. And in all of these papers that involve gig economy platforms, we have seen that the impacts are not equally distributed. They are not the same across all locations. There is heterogeneity. It means that the impacts are different for different groups of people based on their race, gender, ethnicities, or economic status, or their location. So there's always a level of heterogeneity. So we would like to investigate a similar behavior here as well. Like, is there any impact on the incomes in the first place? And if there is it uniform or is it heterogeneous? And lastly, we will talk about the impact on migration. So migration is one of the most important behaviors that we see in the society. Like, you could migrate across cities, across states, across countries. And migrations always have costs. There are economic costs, there are emotional costs, and being a migrant myself from another part of the world, I can definitely relate to that aspect. But the people still migrate because there are some benefits. So do those benefits outweigh the risks and the costs? And how does ride sharing help in influencing the behavior of migration? Does it make people migrate more, or does it make people migrate less? Like, in which way does the impact move? So that is the third question that we would explore in this paper. So this brings us to the research questions. Does Uber affect the income equality in the society in the first place? And if it does, how does it affect it? Are the impacts different across the locations, or are they similar across the different locations? And lastly, what impact do we have on migration? Like, how does Uber help or make it more difficult to migrate? Like, what is the impact on that? So now, how do we measure inequality? So now I will get into the data, but I'll try to keep it as I'll try to just give you a top view, like a superficial view, and not go into the details. So there are many indices to measure inequality. Like, there is something called the Gini index, which looks at which compares the percentiles, the top 80 percentile with the bottom 80 percentile. So there are many other measures. So we tried different measures, but the best one that we found was to use tax returns data. We look at the incomes directly. So we look at the distribution of incomes. And this data has also been used previously in the economics literature. So what exactly do we do here in terms of using the data? And this is an example that I use in my statistics class to explain frequency distribution. Like, I simply look at the number of people that belong to different income groups. So I usually start my statistics class, like on the syllabus day, I start with a distribution of the grades in my previous semester, like how many students got an A and a B. And so it serves two different purposes. Firstly, it helps them quell their fears about the course. They see that a lot more people get A's than what they expected. And at the end, I just tell them that this is nothing but a frequency distribution. So I introduce the concept of frequency distribution, which is my next chapter after the syllabus day. So that's usually what I do. And we are doing something very similar here. So we look at the number of people who belong to different income groups. And how do those numbers change? And where do we collect this data from? From one of our favorite federal agencies, the IRS. We all love the IRS, right? So that's the source of our data. And if I look into the data set, there are many different categories of the data, but we are targeting workers working in the gig economy. And there is a special category for contractors, which falls under business income tax returns. So people like us who have a regular salary, we are in a different category than the contractors, according to the IRS. So there are different groups. So this is the group that we're interested in. So we look at the gross income and subtract some adjustments. And then I would like to introduce the next statistical concept, again, going back to my statistics class. Once we have listed down the number of people under different categories, we just take the proportion. Like what percentage? Like if I have 10 students out of 50 getting an A, it means that I have 20%, like 10 over 50. So that's the relative frequency or the proportion of students that get A. So I tell them that, which means that you have a 20% chance of getting an A in this class. So I try to link the concepts from frequency distribution, relative distribution to probability. So without the students even realizing on the first day of their syllabus setup. So I play around a little bit. So we are doing something similar. So we look at the proportion, the relative proportion, and not the raw numbers of people. Data, so data is the fuel for analysis. So what is the data that we use? So we use a panel data set. So we have data that spreads across different locations and over the timeline. I'll talk about the data first, and I'll go back to the methodology that I use. So we use 9 years of data. 2010 was the earliest data period that was available, and I tried to avoid the COVID years. So we stopped at 2019. And we use the method of staggered difference in differences. So the biggest question in analysis is to differentiate between correlation and causation. Like there are studies that find that increased ice cream sales lead to increased road accidents. There are studies that prove that. So that is causation. That is not causation. So there is an underlying cause that is hidden. It says that good weather, sunny days, that's the key contributor. So sunny days lead to more ice cream sales, and they also lead to more car accidents. So, but it is easier said than done. How do we prove causation? How do we differentiate between the two? I just saw a joke yesterday that said that people who actually are not able to differentiate between the two, they die. Right. So that's the biggest like the biggest challenge that we analysts face, how to differentiate it. And difference and differences is one of the ways in which we can slightly argue for causation. So what does it mean? It means that we look at an experimental setting, so everything remains the same. What if we just introduce a new policy? So in 2021, the Nobel Prize winners in economics, they had a paper which was one of the earliest papers on this methodology. Like you keep everything constant, but you just introduce a new change. It's like an experiment. You introduce a new medicine to one group, and you introduce like a sugar pill or a placebo to the other group, while the two groups are very similar. But so what's the difference? So the difference that we will see will be attributed to the experiment. So we need to keep everything else constant. In this case, the experiment is that whether a location has Uber or not. And it's like, does Allegheny County have Uber versus does Steuben County have Uber? Yes or no? So it's a yes or no question, and it changes over time. So we might have the first Uber in Allegheny in 2026, and we still don't have it in the Steuben County. But after 2 years, we might have the Uber service in both the counties. So we have the difference, but this is staggered. Uber does not launch its services at the same time at every location. So there's a difference in that. So that's the methodology that we use. So we have certain states and counties. We have different brackets of income. So we divide the total group into 5 brackets of income. We try to get the information about Uber's entry dates, so that those are the dates of the experiment. And we also get the data about migration from IRS, our dear friend IRS. This is the model. I won't go into the details. I don't want to scare off the crowd with this ugly looking model. So all I want to focus on is the fact that we have a dependent variable. So that looks at the proportion of income. So that is the variable on which we are trying to see the impact. That's the outcome variable. And the only variable that we are interested in, or maybe the primary variable that we are interested in, is this variable of Uber, which is nothing but a binary variable, 0 or 1. Do we have Uber in this location or not? Yes or no? So we don't have any other values other than 0 or 1 for this variable. And all the other variables that you see, they try to eliminate any other source of, like any other effect. So we are trying to eliminate the effect of correlation and move towards causation. So that's a model. And then we have a different model where we try to check the impact and the heterogeneity of the impact. Is the impact the same across all locations or are they different? So that's the model that we use for the second research question. And here are the results. So what do we find? We find that there is an increase in the proportion of people in the middle income groups after the entry of Uber. And there is a decrease in the proportion of the lowest income groups. So there is a shift. So people are actually moving from the lowest income groups to the middle income groups, keeping all other factors constant. So if you just look at this impact of Uber. So ideally, all of them should be in the middle group, like if everyone has the same income. So this proportion should have been 100%, but we do see an increase. And we like to see stars in our results. We love stars as analysts because stars tell us that we should look at those results in the first place. If we don't have stars beside the numbers, we don't even look at those results. So that's the first thing. It really makes us happy to see stars where we want to see them, and it makes us unhappy to see those stars in places we don't want to see them. So we are driven by our stars, and then we look at the signs. So the positive signs show an increase, and the negative signs show a decrease. And in rare cases, we are actually interested in the actual numbers, but that's not very common. So that is what we see. So we say that Uber actually helps us in bringing more equality in the society. And what these results mean is that these effects are stronger in locations where there is more unemployment, which is quite intuitive, right? If you have more employment in a location, you will see a higher impact or a stronger impact of Uber in terms of the inequality. But it has a weaker impact in places where gas prices are high because Uber doesn't adjust for the gas prices. So that negates out the effect. And similarly, similar to the unemployment, there is also a stronger effect in places where there is more violent crime. Now, this was a little surprising. What does crime have to do with Uber and its services? But it was found in research that Uber is actually more popular in areas where there is more violent crime because of the safety reasons. Just because of safety between the residence of the person and the bus stop or the train station that they want to reach. So Uber is more popular in places with more crime, which is why we see a stronger effect. In terms of migration, we find that Uber leads to a decrease in the proportion of people who are actually moving out of their locations. So that is good for the local communities. So because Uber is providing these additional opportunities, people see less of a need to migrate out of their local communities. And it is supported by our next result, which actually shows that Uber leads to an increase in jobs. So keeping all other factors constant, Uber leads to more jobs, leading to lower migration. So this is to summarize the results. Uber helps reduce income inequality by reducing the proportion of tax returns in the low-income groups and increasing the number of people in the middle-income groups. And this impact is stronger in places that have more unemployment and more violent crime, and lower in places that have higher gas prices. Uber also leads to a decrease in the proportion of people moving out by creating more local jobs. But what does it mean? What's in it for the different stakeholders? Now, those are the results. Now, what sense do we make out of the results? So Uber or similar platforms, they increase welfare by reducing income inequality. Now, what does it mean? It means that the platforms and the contractors, they can come to a discussion. They can bring down the heat. Okay, so there is an opportunity for collaboration. It's not all bad. So we can look at the positive aspects. And what's in it for the firms, for companies like Uber? They can target the low-income groups. The low-income groups are the biggest beneficiaries. So if you have to choose between people who are relying on Uber for their primary income over people who are just looking at Uber for additional income, prioritize the lower income group. So they are your priority. And also there is a message to the policymakers. In many places, services of Uber have been banned by policymakers due to resistance from the taxi drivers who said their jobs were being affected. But policymakers, it's a request that they look at all the implications and not just one aspect. And this is definitely one of the positive implications which can help the cause of these platforms in the eyes of the policymakers. However, this is just a signal, it's a red alert. So we need to address the elephant in the room, which is unemployment. Gig economy is not a permanent solution. Rather, it's a wake-up call that brings our attention to the bigger problem of unemployment. Because these sources of income could be temporary. We have seen many closures which might affect. So there is a need to address the bigger problem in the. So that is all from my side. Thank you, everyone. And that's my contact details. So thank you for your patience. Thank you.
Thank you for the talk. How much do Uber rider drivers get paid?
That's a great question. So that actually relates to so anyway, so let me just get this back. So hopefully, we have we stopped the screen sharing. Just think
You want to?
yeah, I think I lost the screen sharing.
Do you need it?
Yeah, now we have it here. Okay. So if you look at the table, so we find that the biggest increase in the middle income group, which is somewhere around 25,000 to 50,000, and that actually matches with the net income of Uber drivers, which is somewhat in the range of $30,000 to $45,000. So that's the average income which Uber drivers make after their expenses. So here's the thing. Yeah, that's a great question. So they don't really have an hourly rate. So how do they earn money? So they get paid for their rides. And once you make, suppose you make a payment of $50 on the Uber app, Uber keeps a 25% commission. So it keeps $12.50 with itself, and the remaining goes to the driver. So it totally depends on how frequently they're on their working hours. So it totally depends on the demand and the supply, like what's the demand for the rides, and it's like an auto-correcting market in economy. So they don't have a rate in the first place, and they don't also have the associated benefits.
When you talk about Uber, are you talking specifically about Uber, or is Uber a kind of a generic term for other ride apps like Lyft and things like that?
Yeah, excellent question. So we have two major players, Uber and Lyft, and there are some other minor players in the West Coast, but these two comprise about 99% of the entire market. So as a starting point, we consider Uber because Uber is the first, in most of the locations that we have seen, Uber is the first entrant. Uber is the first firm that actually entered the market, and Lyft followed. However, we have run a robustness check to see the generalizability of our results. So where we considered both Uber and Lyft, and we looked at the firm that entered the market first. And we had similar results, simply because Uber was the first entrant in most of the cases. So that allows us to use Uber as the proxy for any ride-sharing platform.
Can I ask one first? Was there an average age that you found for any of the drivers? And I ask because I've often kind of daydreamed that if something like this or Lyft or Uber Eats or DoorDash still exists when I'm getting ready to retire and I'm moving to a new city, this is definitely something that I might be willing to do for a couple of years just to kind of get to know the place, get to know the restaurants and so on. Now, did any of your data ferret out people who are doing it for that kind of reason, not necessarily for the economic?
Yeah, and I have a similar thought. I have a similar plan, and it really attracts me to have Uber as a retirement option. And I've actually met drivers who retired from like CXO positions, and they were just driving an Uber for fun to meet new people and just to spend their time. To be honest, I haven't used a variable yet to measure out that effect, but that's a great idea. So I think I can I can add age to the list of my variables to see the moderating effects and see how the impact might change across different locations having different age groups. So thank you for the suggestion.
It's me again. Your research is based in the US, right?
Yes.
How confident would you be about projecting your conclusions to other parts of the world?
Yeah, that's really an important question. And based on my experience, when it's like talking about the other papers that I've seen, I've actually seen studies on the same research question having different results for different parts of the world. So, like for example, when I looked at the impact of Uber on the automobile market in terms of sales, I reviewed the literature, and then there were absolutely opposite results for the United States and China. Simply because the market dynamics might be different, there might be like different compositions of different economic groups. So I haven't found or assessed this study yet in the context of other countries, but based on my experience with other research questions, I think there is a chance that we might get to see different results from other parts of the world. So that might be a future scope for other researchers to compare the results.
Great talk, Ayush. That was
Thank you.
awesome. So this was surprising to me because my experience of living in a city has always been that we all hate Uber and Lyft, and it makes it harder to live in a city. In a couple specific ways. Mostly for me, it's that I bike a lot, and biking in a city, you're much more likely to have a Uber car pulled over in the bike lane. You have to go into traffic, you get hit by a car, you have to go to the hospital. So that, and then also just sort of the usability of the city for people who don't want to be in a car. So using public transit that's sort of like you were talking about with the car industry. It makes it less appealing for the municipality to spend more money on the public transit. So I guess given that sort of tension or the sort of human experience as being maybe contrary, at least in my experience, let's say, to what you've found, do you have data to make that comparison or sort of take the lived experience of people and compare that to your sort of migration and income data?
Yeah, that's a great point. Like, especially in terms of migration, like how did it affect the other stakeholders in terms of the attraction of the city, the livability of the city? So yeah, so we always have different and opposing factors. There is always an empirical tension. So I just let the analysis do its work. Before running the analysis, I had no idea in which direction the results would go. So based on these set of results, like we do see a reduction in the outward migration, but yes, it is very difficult to actually pinpoint the behavior of the society on this aspect. And there are some other papers on which I've worked, and there are many other literatures which look at the impact of ride sharing on public transit. And they have found different, like if I'd like to share my experience based on some of the research with some other researchers have done. So they have found that there are different effects for buses and trains. Because like there's a substitution effect with buses because you're occupying the same roads, but there is a complementary effect with trains because Ubers are helping people get to their train stations. I've also looked at the impact on healthcare services. That is one of my other dissertation essays. And we find that Uber actually has become a popular substitute. Like it's not a great thing to have, but in reality, it has become a substitute for ambulances as well. Because in cities, it has been found that it takes a shorter time for Ubers to reach the patient than an ambulance, simply through the power of the technology, because it is connecting you to the nearest Uber that is around you. So plenty of research. So this is quite a saturated and like a jam-packed research avenue, and there are many thoughts and counter thoughts. So yeah, definitely it's up for discussion. And most of the papers or most of the articles that I see in the media, they're against these companies. So I echo your sentiment. Like most of us, we hate Uber. So this is just one of the many few results which might help build Uber's cause. And it could have totally gone the other way around. So
Hi.
Hi.
So hopefully my question makes sense, but you said that the rise of like, say, Uber as like a job option kind of indicates that employment is decreasing in other places. If we did live in a perfect world, let's say, and everyone was able to have the employment that they wanted, how do you think that would affect something like Uber and maybe like the other niches it does sometimes help fill, like with the issue with like the ambulance? Yeah.
yeah. So to answer your question, I think I'll take the help of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So right now in this imperfect world, I think there is a large portion of drivers who are joining the platform simply because of the economic needs of sustenance. But if you're able to move up a rank, if we have like perfect employment, in that case, maybe, and that's just my thought. I don't really have any statistics to back my thought, but I believe that in that case, we might see a shift in the composition of drivers. In that case, we might have more drivers who are just using Uber for their supplemental income, like in addition to their day jobs. They're just using it for fun or to like spend their time. And there have been some anecdotal evidence which suggests that people actually do that, like well-qualified people having a high-paying jobs. They just run Ubers on the weekends to meet people because they're just bored at their daily jobs. So in that, I think that is one of the effects which we might see. And also in terms of the effects on other aspects like healthcare, the other aspect would be the demand from the riders. So we would need to consider both the supply aspect from the drivers and the demand aspect from the riders to see how it pans out in terms of the relative effects in the other fields.
Hi. So many of the problems with Uber stem from the inherent like gig aspect of it. I remember a while ago, Uber drivers were trying to get some form of a like guaranteed wage while they were working to kind of make sure that they could actually live while doing it. If the like gig economy sort of shifts in that direction where rather than it being something that these people are, working when they want to and relying entirely on like individual interactions with other people and instead are getting like some form of benefits from the company, how do you think that that would change the way that the data works out with like, decreasing economic inequality and like where it's more prevalent at with, high crime areas, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a great point. So I would like to put this disclaimer that whenever we look at economic measures, it just includes one aspect of the society. Like it's similar to comparing the GDP of a country with the happiness index, which is why we moved from the measure of GDP to happiness index. It's not just about the money that you earn, but it's also about all the other aspects like the benefits, the healthcare benefits, and the retirement benefits. So will the Uber drivers stop their protests looking at the results? Definitely not, because this is just one aspect. So I think to answer your question, we would have to perform more research using other variables, using other metrics of life and social welfare, like outside the raw economy, to answer those questions. But that is definitely worth researching. Like, how does it impact the other aspects? And like when I look at the news, I completely agree with you that most drivers, they are protesting for better rights. There have been a few exceptions, and I often like to talk to Uber drivers just to get their ideas on my research projects. So there have been a few instances where they actually preferred the current setup because they say that like right now we fill out the W-2s for our taxes. So that is for the regular employees, but they fill out the 1098s. So they have a different form for it. And it comes with other benefits. So they get some tax benefits, which is why they don't want to shift to like the employee status from the contractor status. But I'm sure they're in the minority. The majority still believes they would be better off as employees. And there are some governments which have tried to pass legislations to force Uber to classify them as employees, but it just doesn't fit into their model. So it goes against the economies of such platforms. Like Uber doesn't own any of the cars. They're just the technology. They are just the aggregators. So definitely worth investigating. Difficult question to answer right now, but they're definitely worth looking into it.
There are no other questions. Please join me in thanking Ayush once again.
Thank you, Phil.